It's a somewhat depressing fact about football that budgets correlate almost directly with points tallies, league finishes, and ultimately trophies. Teams with small budgets can have great seasons, and teams with big budgets can have terrible ones. But sure as night follows day, eventually things will revert to the mean. Bleak as that may sound, it is why the occasions in which a team spends heavily but fails, or spends miserly and succeeds, tends to be so cherished. Take the example of PSG between 2020 and 2023, under Qatari state ownership, who spent over €300 million, added the likes of Achraf Hakimi, Sergio Ramos and Lionel Messi, to a squad which could already boast Angel Di Maria, Neymar and Kylian Mbappe, and amassed the highest wage bill in the history of world football, only to go another 3 seasons without getting their hands on the Champions League, crashing out in consecutive round of 16 ties, and even missing out on the 2020-21 league untitled to Lille, whose budget was 1/5 of the size of their own. At least PSG still managed to win trophies during that time though. Everton had the 9th highest net spend in world football between 2017 and 2022, above Barcelona, Chelsea and Liverpool, but failed to finish higher than 8th in any of those 5 seasons. When they finished 17th in the 2022-23 season, only narrowly avoiding relegation for the second successive campaign, the Toffees still had a top-half wage bill in the Premier League, which played a large part in their 2 points deductions last season. When Leicester City were relegated from the Premier League in the 2022-23 season, they had the highest wage bill in the league outside of the Rich Six, and actually higher than that season's Champions League finalists, Inter Milan. Between 2015 and 2020, Sunderland did some of the worst transfer business in the history of the sport, finishing bottom of the Premier League table despite having the league's 13th highest wage bill, and bottom of the Championship table despite having the league's 6th highest wage bill in back-to-back seasons, and then failing on 3 occasions to win promotion from League One. Stoke City were also relegated from the Premier League with the league's 13th highest wage bill, but even more remarkably, they finished 16th, 15th and 14th over each of the next 3 seasons, despite having 3 of the highest wage bills, not just in those seasons, but that the Championship had ever seen. And between 2013 and 2019, Fulham were relegated with the 9th highest wage bill in the Premier League, proceeded to finish 17th and 20th in the Championship, and after they finally earned a return to the top flight, they spent over £100 million on transfers and amassed the league's 13th highest wage bill, only to be immediately relegated once again. Outside of England, Arminia Bielefeld decided to splash the cash in the Bundesliga in the 2021-22 season, only to suffer a double relegation. Schalke spent even more between 2018 and 2021, also suffering relegation from the Bundesliga and putting the club in an ongoing existential threat, and Inter Milan had the 2nd highest net spend in Italy between 2011 and 2017 after winning a historic treble, only to finish 6th, 9th, 5th, 8th, 4th and 7th. You get the idea. Anyway, none of those historically dreadful financial underachievements even make this 7, which should give you some idea as to the degree of disastrousness that we're talking about. Without further ado then, who you'd have to call an enormous financial overachiever, bagging a tidy $75 for his personalised video messages over on Cameo, no sponsorship here. Here are 7 of the worst pound-for-pound football teams ever assembled. 7th. AC Milan, 2013 to 2016. Their great rivals Inter Milan earned themselves a dishonourable mention during a similar period in the introduction. This wasn't a great time for football in Milan, but AC Milan's pound per point record and sheer abjectness between 2013 and 2016 was in a league of its own. Fresh off the back of winning their 18th Serie A League title in 2011, Milan finished 2nd and 3rd in 2012 and 2013, struggling to keep pace with a resurgent Juventus. They responded to the gauntlet that had been laid down by Juve by significantly outspending them over the next 3 seasons, and indeed, everyone else in Italian football for that matter. Between 2013 and 2016, AC Milan were the only Serie A side to amass a net spend in excess of €100 million, in addition to massively increasing their wage bill. Big names like Michael Essien, Kazuki Honda, and returning legend Kaká arrived during the 2013-14 season, only for Milan to fall from third the previous season all the way down to 8th place, failing to qualify for Europe for the first time since the 1990s. That failure cost Massimiliano Allegri his job midway through the season, and as if that wasn't painful enough in of itself, Allegri proceeded to win the Serie A title in each of the next 5 seasons managing Juventus. Club legend Filippo Inzaghi was appointed to oversee Milan's recovery, backed by signings like Adil Rami, Giacomo Bonaventura, and Fernando Torres. Milan fell even further instead, from 8th down to 10th, one of their lowest ever finishes in Serie A, and ensuring a second successive season without any European football. The late Sinisa Mihajlovic was brought in to replace Inzaghi, and 2015-16 would be the second highest spending season in the history of AC Milan, trailing only the 2001-02 season. Carlos Bacca was signed from Sevilla for over €30 million, Roma duo Alessio Romagnoli and Andrea Bertolacci cost Milan close to €50 million, and Mario Balotelli returned to the San Siro on loan from Liverpool. Following all of that investment, at the end of a promising 3-year cycle, AC Milan finished 7th, below Sassuolo and Fiorentina, and 34 points behind champions Juventus, making it 3 seasons without European football for the first time since the early 1980s, when they were relegated to Serie B. Bacca eventually joined Villarreal for just €7 million, Balotelli scored 1 goal in 20 league games back at Milan, and Silvio Berlusconi, now dead, burnt through Milan's 6th coach in 3 seasons. Milan had only had 3 managers in the preceding 12 years up to that point. A historically dreadful run then, and it would be remiss of me not to mention that Milan finished 6th in each of the next 2 seasons, despite having their highest ever spending season in 2017-18, splurging out close to €200 million, only to miss out on Champions League qualification by 8 whole points, and the Scudetto by 31. A truly abysmal period for 7-time European champions, which came at an immense cost. It's fortunate to only feature in 7th. 6th, Leeds United, 1999 to 2004. It should be noted that I'm not including single seasons in this 7 for the reasons outlined in the introduction. Plenty of teams have one-off freak seasons, but it is really an era of financial underachievement that we are interested in. Otherwise, I would have included Al Ittihad spending over €100 million, making the likes of Fabinho, N'Golo Kante, and especially Karim Benzema among the highest paid players on the planet and of all time, and appointing Nuno Espirito Santo followed by Marcelo Gallardo, only to finish 5th last season, failing to qualify for the AFC Champions League, and 42 points off the title in a league which is worse than the Championship. Fortunately for Al Ittihad, they are a state-owned enterprise who can weather almost infinite losses. Unfortunately for Leeds United, in the early 2000s, they were owned by a consortium led by Peter Ridsdale, who most certainly couldn't weather almost infinite losses. Leeds United won the last First Division title in 1992, before the breakaway of the Premier League, and despite struggling to continue to compete at the top end of the division, they retained their top-flight status throughout the 1990s. When Leeds-born Leeds fan Peter Ridsdale became chairman in 1997, though, he signalled his ambition to return Leeds to the summit of the English game. It started well, following the appointment of George Graham and smart signings like Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank, as Leeds climbed from mid-table to 5th and then 4th, but it was in the summer of 1999 that the serious investment began. Over the next 3 seasons, Leeds were the biggest spenders in English football, with a net spend almost twice the size of rivals Manchester United's and over 8 times the size of Arsenal's, who were the only 2 teams to win the Premier League title during that era, including paying a British record transfer fee for Rio Ferdinand in the summer of 2000. With the big fees came big wages, as Leeds handed the likes of Ferdinand, Robbie Fowler, Mark Viduka, Harry Kewell, Robbie Keane, Seth Johnson, and even Danny Mills truly eye-watering contracts. Leeds' intense investment was a gamble by Ridsdale, who had taken out loans guaranteed against future gate receipts and Champions League revenue. There was just one small problem. Leeds fell from 3rd to 4th in the 2000 to 2001 season, failing to qualify for the Champions League, and after they missed out again in 2001-02, falling further to 5th, they were plunged into a financial abyss. Efforts were made to slash the club's wage bill between 2002 and 2004, and to generate revenue through player sales, but it wasn't anywhere near enough to meet the scale of the crisis. When Ridsdale resigned in March 2003, Leeds were described as being the most indebted club in England, owing more than £100 million. To make matters worse, a squad that still contained the likes of Lucas Radebe, Jonathan Woodgate, Mark Viduka, Nick Barmby and Harry Kewell finished 15th in the 2002-03 season, and in 2003-04, Leeds were relegated to the Championship, despite reportedly still having the 6th highest wage bill in the English game, trailing only the Big Five, who all finished between 1st and 5th. Over the next few years, Leeds were relegated again, went into administration, suffered points deductions, and spent 3 seasons in League One. All in all then, you'd probably have to say that Ridsdale's gamble didn't pay off. 5th, Real Madrid, 2003 to 2006. Okay, Madridistas, I am ready for you in the comments. Come at me, bro. Give me your worst. The Real Madrid squad of the early to mid-2000s was, simply put, up to that point, the most expensive squad ever assembled. Florentino Perez was elected Real Madrid president in 2000, ushering in the so-called Galacticos era, starting with Luis Figo for a world record fee from Barcelona, followed by Zinedine Zidane for another world record fee in 2001, and the Brazilian Ronaldo in 2002. During this time, Madrid enjoyed immediate success, lifting the La Liga title in 2001 and 2003, either side of a 9th Champions League in 2002. The fact that Real Madrid added to that very expensively assembled super team with yet more superstars between 2003 and 2006, while spending an absolute fortune and won nothing, is very rarely acknowledged though. In the summer of 2003, most famously, under Sir Alex Ferguson's former assistant Carlos Queiroz, Los Blancos signed the most famous footballer on the planet, David Beckham, whilst allowing Claude Makelele to depart for Chelsea. President Florentino Perez stated, quote, "We will not miss Makelele. His technique is average, he lacks the speed and skill to take the ball past opponents, and 90% of his distribution either goes backwards or sideways." End quote. Whereas fellow Galacticos Zinedine Zidane bemoaned, quote, "Why put another layer of gold paint on the Bentley when you are losing the entire engine?" End quote. Real Madrid fell from 1st to 4th the following season, finishing below Valencia, Barcelona and Deportivo La Coruña. Meanwhile, Real Zaragoza beat them in the final of the Copa del Rey, and Monaco knocked them out of the Champions League in the quarter-finals. The following summer saw a trio of new arrivals, Walter Samuel, Jonathan Woodgate and Michael Owen, but Perez burnt through 3 different managers as Madrid failed to reclaim the La Liga title, lost to Real Valladolid in the round of 16 of the Copa del Rey, and were dumped out of the Champions League by Juventus, again in the round of 16. There was one last push in the 2005-06 season as the likes of Roberto Carlos, Zinedine Zidane, Ronaldo, Beckham and even club legend Raul approached the end of their time at the Bernabeu. Sergio Ramos, Robinho and Julio Baptista were signed for the best part of €100 million, joined in the January by hot-headed Italian magician Antonio Cassano, but Madrid only lost further ground on Barcelona, who finished a whopping 12 points above them. They fell to Real Zaragoza yet again in the Copa del Rey semi-finals this time, after losing the first leg 6-1, and Arsenal knocked them out of the Champions League again in the round of 16 stage. All in all, Real Madrid were the second highest spenders in all of world football between 2003 and 2006, trailing only Roman Abramovich's Chelsea, strengthening a squad which already boasted the likes of Casillas, Carlos, Guti, Figo, Raul, Zidane and Ronaldo, who had recently been crowned as both Spanish and European champions, and they proceeded to win absolutely nothing over the next 3 seasons, failing to even get beyond the quarterfinals of the Champions League, a competition which even subpar Madrid teams tend to go deep in. It's interesting to analyse this period at Madrid because the signing of Beckham in particular helped solidify their status as a super club and commercial powerhouse, and Sergio Ramos would eventually become a talismanic captain for them, so it wasn't wholly without merit, but on the pitch, given the context, it was a straightforward financial underachievement of truly epic proportions. 4th, Sunderland, 1950 to 1958. Yeah, alright, cue the Endrick jokes. As has been well documented, the world's most talked about wonder kid is a HITC Sevens superfan, and it comes across in his love of the history of the beautiful game. His Real Madrid teammates may have sarcastically nicknamed him Bobby, after he called Bobby Charlton one of his footballing idols, but here at HITC Sevens HQ, otherwise known as my house, we, by which I mean I, respect Endrick's passion for that which predates his time on this planet, and pretty soon, after he watches this video, and it won't be long since he has notifications turned on, his Real Madrid teammates can look forward to hearing all about Sunderland's financial underachievements during the 1950s. Before Chelsea and Manchester City, and indeed Blackburn in the 1990s and Everton in the 70s, Sunderland were English football's big spenders of the post-war era. It had been Arsenal during the 1920s and 30s, beginning an era of dominance under Herbert Chapman, but after Highbury was requisitioned as an air raid precautions and bombed by the Luftwaffe, the repair costs swallowed up most of Arsenal's cash reserves. Sunderland filled the void vacated by Arsenal, starting with the arrival of Len Shackleton from rivals Newcastle United for a British record fee in 1948, player-coach Eva Broadis for not much less from Carlisle United in 1949, and Trevor Ford for another British record fee, £30,000, from Aston Villa in 1950. Ford arrived soon after Sunderland had finished 3rd in the First Division as one of Britain's highest-rated centre-forwards, and he, along with Billy Bingham signed for £10,000 from Glentoran, was expected to be the catalyst that would bring silverware to Roker Park. The spending continued throughout the 1950s, but not only did Sunderland fail to get their hands on either the First Division title or the FA Cup, having won both in the 1930s, they fell from 3rd to 12th place in the 1950-51 season, 18th in the 1953-54 season, 20th in 1956-57, and in 1958, the Black Cats, as the highest spending English club of that decade, were relegated to the Second Division. It was an almost unimaginable failure in relation to the club's spending and ambition. The problem, it seemed, was that Sunderland hadn't built a team, but a collection of individuals. Record breakers Len Shackleton and Trevor Ford didn't get along either on or off the pitch, which led to Ford being sold in 1953, meanwhile Broadis left even earlier, in 1951. Fellow late 40s and early 50s big spenders, Independiente Santa Fe, deserve the most dishonourable of mentions as probably the second highest spenders, trailing only their Bogota rivals Millonarios, during this period. In the El Dorado era of Colombian football, which was also the first professional era of Colombian football, the country's leaders convinced themselves that they could distract the population from a brutal ongoing civil war by bringing the world's best footballers to the Maya. Santa Fe were at the forefront of the on-field revolution, bringing in Argentine internationals like Angel Peruca, René Pontoni, Juan José Ferraro, and most notably Hector Real, who later won 5 European Cups with Real Madrid, as well as poaching Manchester United's penalty king Charlie Mitten and Stoke City centre-half Neil Franklin, who was widely considered to be the best defender in Europe at the time, and still arguably the greatest that English footballers ever produced. In theory, then, Santa Fe ought to have been just about unstoppable. In reality, Franklin only stuck around for 6 weeks, destroying his career in the process. The Argentines trained with all of the intensity of Hatem Ben Arfa after a night out, and Santa Fe fell from title winners before their massive investment in 1948 to third in the Campeonato Profesional in 1949, 8th in 1950, 6th in 1951, and all the way down to 9th in 1952. Pretty catastrophic stuff then, which I imagine will have Arda Güler on tenterhooks when Hendrik tells him all about it. Third, Chelsea, 2022 to 2024. Possibly the most controversial inclusion in this 7. I went back and forth on whether or not Chelsea shouldn't even feature in this 7 because it's only a couple of seasons with a clear focus on signing young players, meaning the real fruits of their investment may take some time to blossom, or whether they should actually be top because they are quite literally the highest spending and the most expensively assembled squad of all time, having inherited a team that finished third, reached both the FA Cup and EFL Cup finals, and won the Champions League only 12 months earlier, and that truly unprecedented investment took them all the way to the dizzying heights of 12th place in the 2022-23 season, Chelsea's lowest league finish since the early 1990s, when they didn't have a pot to piss in, and 6th last season, miles off the top 3, and only just qualifying for the UEFA Conference League. In the end, I settled for third, and I'll try to explain why. Chelsea are, just factually, over the last couple of seasons pound for pound, one of the worst football teams of all time. I know that might sound somewhat hyperbolic, but I have made an entire video explaining why that is the case, and I think some people may have been desensitized to just how insane their spending has truly been on what was already the third best team in England. In 2 seasons, 2022-23 and 2023-24, Chelsea spent over €1 billion on transfer fees alone and roughly €750 million net. Their net spend was over double any other club in world football, and it's not as though Chelsea had been particularly frugal in the previous 18 years under Roman Abramovich. Chelsea's wage bill shot up to £404 million in the 2022-23 season, Chelsea's highest of all time and the second highest in the Premier League, far higher than either Liverpool, Man United's or Arsenal's. A reminder, at this stage, that Chelsea finished 12th. Arsenal were Premier League runners-up, finishing with almost twice as many points as Chelsea, despite the fact that the Blues' wage bill was over 70% larger than Arsenal's. Chelsea finished 3 places and a massive 15 points behind their West London rivals Brentford, whose wage bill was literally less than a quarter of theirs, and who have spent less in their entire history than Chelsea spent that season alone. In a European context, PSG and Real Madrid were the only teams with a higher wage bill than Chelsea, and in Madrid's case, only just. This is a team, I really cannot emphasise this enough, that finished 12th. Historically, at the elite level, I'm not sure there has ever been a financial underachievement that even comes remotely close. Last season, Chelsea improved somewhat, going from 44 to 63 points, and rising from 12th to 6th. But we are talking about a team with one of the biggest wage bills and literally the highest transfer expenditure in the history of the sport. 6th is not an impressive recovery with that in mind. Chelsea finished below Tottenham and Aston Villa, the latter of whom have a wage bill less than half the size of their own. Maybe, somehow, Chelsea's strategy will pay off. They have made a bright start this season, and no one can deny that they have plenty of quality in their squad. I mean, you would sincerely hope so. They have spent the GDP of a small island nation and signed approximately 12% of all of the world's professional footballers. It would be an achievement in of itself if they hadn't signed anyone who was half decent at kicking a ball, but they are heading for a PSR breach. It is practically unavoidable at this stage, and for the 2 seasons between 2022 and 2024, the disconnect between their spend and performance and results is so extreme, I felt obligated to include them. Second, Queen's Park Rangers, 2011 to 2016. We don't have to travel far from Stamford Bridge, which is actually in Fulham, to Loftus Road in Shepherd's Bush, about 2.5 miles as the crow flies, or, roughly 4.5 hours in London traffic, from 3rd to 2nd place. QPR didn't spend quite as much as Chelsea, quite literally no one ever has in the entire history of the sport, but they were a whole lot worse. What's more, whilst there is one especially disastrous season, this is a 5-year period that we're talking about. QPR won promotion to the Premier League for the first time since the mid-90s in 2011, following 4 years of intense investment under the ownership of Formula One tycoons Flavio Briatore and Bernie Ecclestone, and steel magnate Lakshmi Mittal, the latter of whom, despite only owning 20% of Rangers, actually became the richest owner in the history of the championship. Oddly, Mittal still owns 3% of QPR. Between the 07-08 and 10-11 seasons, QPR spent a fair old chunk of change, especially on wages, but at least it led to Rangers winning the championship title under Neil Warnock. Following promotion, QPR replaced practically their entire first-team squad, undoing all of the hard work that had been done the previous season in terms of team spirit and squad cohesion. The likes of Bobby Zamora, Jibril Cisse, Kieran Dyer and Joey Barton all arrived on massive salaries, particularly after Tony Fernandes became chairman and majority shareholder, as QPR outlined their ambition not just to survive in the Premier League, but to establish themselves and kick on. QPR's wage bill ballooned to almost £60 million, putting it on par with Newcastle and Everton's, who finished 4th and 7th respectively that season. QPR, meanwhile, they finished 17th, surviving by just a solitary point. Following a dramatic final day of the season, which saw Sergio Aguero win Manchester City, their first title of the Premier League era by scoring against QPR, manager Mark Hughes swore that the club would never be put in that situation ever again. In an effort to ensure that, QPR spent more than €50 million in the 2012-13 season, adding the likes of Ji-Sung Park, Jose Bosingwa, Loic Remy, and Julio Cesar to their ranks. QPR's wage bill, meanwhile, shot up to £78 million, the 7th highest in the Premier League, trailing only the rich 6. Mark Hughes was dismissed in November and replaced by veteran Premier League boss Harry Redknapp, who was highly regarded following 4 successful seasons at Tottenham. In return for this extraordinary level of investment, QPR finished, drumroll please, dead last. Yes, with the Premier League's 5th highest net spend over the last 2 seasons and 7th highest wage bill, Rangers finished bottom of the Premier League table, having won just 4 games all season, a measly 25 points, and a massive 14 points from safety. Genuinely, impressively atrocious. Harry Redknapp stuck around for life in the Championship, as QPR maintained a £75 million wage bill. At the time, the highest ever wage bill in the Championship had been Newcastle United in the 2009-10 season at £47 million. QPR's was 60% higher and would still have been among the highest in the Premier League, had they not been relegated, as they added the likes of Charlie Austin, Richard Dunn, and Harry Redknapp's old pal Nico Cranshaw to their ranks in the 2nd tier. With that budget, QPR ought to have walked the Championship and been in European contention in the Premier League. In reality, they finished 4th in the Championship, 13 points off the automatic promotion places, and 22 points off the title. Nonetheless, Rangers still managed to win promotion, courtesy of a 90th minute winner by Bobby Zamora in the Championship playoff final, and back in the big time, out came the chequebook once again. In came Steven Corker, Leroy Fair and Rio Ferdinand, as Rangers racked up the 12th highest wage bill in the division and, inevitably therefore, finished dead last yet again. Over the next couple of seasons, QPR maintained one of the highest wage bills that the Championship has ever seen, but somehow managed to finish 12th and 18th. In the 2016-17 season, they only actually avoided relegation to League One by 2 points. Overall, between the 2011-12 and 2015-16 seasons, QPR had the 9th highest net spend in English football and consistently one of the highest wage bills, and in return, they finished bottom of the Premier League table twice and 4th and 12th in the Championship. Truly spectacular stuff, which I have made an entire video about because it is so terrible, it really deserved it. First, Aston Villa. 2012 to 2016. If you're wondering why English clubs dominate this 7, it is because there is lots of money and lots of very stupid people in English football. It is that simple. It wasn't simple splitting Aston Villa and QPR though, during 2 similar periods, in first and second. In some ways, QPR's spending was more comically atrocious, but I think Aston Villa's financial underachievement is probably even less forgivable. Don't forget, unlike QPR, Villa were an established Premier League club. They finished 6th in 3 consecutive seasons between 2007 and 2010, as well as reaching a League Cup final before Martin O'Neill's resignation. Following a significant regression in the 2011-12 season, in which Villa finished 16th, billionaire owner and Nepo baby Randy Lerner was forced to get out the checkbook. In came Christian Benteke, Ron Vlaar and Matthew Lowton, among others, along with the new manager in Paul Lambert, as Villa's wage bill, at £72 million, climbed to being the 8th highest in the Premier League. Villa finished 15th, 5 points above the relegation zone, in a very underwhelming, if not quite catastrophic campaign, which was followed by a fresh wave of arrivals. Villa's wage bill, despite falling to £69 million, was still the 9th highest in the country, but Villa finished 15th yet again, still only 5 points above the drop. Hey, they were consistent, if nothing else. And they really weren't much of anything else. The following season, Villa's wage bill ballooned to £84 million, the 7th highest in the Premier League, trailing only the rich 6. Yet they slumped to 17th, Villa's lowest league finish since the mid-1980s, only avoiding relegation by 3 points. If you thought those 3 seasons were bad, the 2015-16 campaign was something else. Desperate to course correct, Villa overhauled their squad, using the funds secured by the sales of Christian Benteke and Fabian Delph, and then some, to welcome the likes of Jordan Ayew, Jordan Amavi, Adama Traore, Jordan Veretout, Idrissa Gueye, and Rudy Gestede to Villa Park. Those signings set Villa back about €60 million, but it was the arrivals of Joleon Lescott and Mika Richards, for a nominal fee and a free transfer, but on massive wages, from West Brom and Man City, that really hurt them the most. A combination of injuries, poor form, and a total absence of either belief, effort, or both, made the pair of them almost useless, if not worse to Villa, while earning an absolute fortune. Villa's wage bill rose to £93 million, their highest ever, and only £7 million behind Tottenham's, who finished 3rd and qualified for the Champions League that season. Leicester City, who won the Premier League title, only had the 16th highest wage bill in the division. Villa, meanwhile, endured not just their worst ever season, but one of the worst that the Premier League has ever witnessed. They only won 3 games all season, amassed a pathetic 17 points, and finished 22 points from safety. Watford, who finished 13th, had a wage bill less than 2/3 of the size of Villa's. Statistically speaking, Villa were the 3rd worst Premier League team of all time, since promoted to 4th, after Huddersfield Town won just 16 points in the 2018-19 season, but on a points per game basis, having amassed 17 points, with the 7th highest wage bill in the Premier League, and indeed, the 19th highest in all of Europe, above that season's Europa League winners Sevilla, it might just be the worst of all time. So that is it for today's video. Aside from those already mentioned, Manchester United for the entire period between Alex Ferguson's retirement in 2013 and up to the end of last season in 2024 came very close to featuring. When you look at what they have spent versus what they have produced over such an extended period of time, it is pretty impressive, in all of the wrong ways, and also Newcastle United over a much shorter period in the 2007-08 and 2008-09 seasons, when they finished 12th and 18th, suffering relegation to the Championship, despite having the 5th highest wage bill in the Premier League, higher than Everton, who finished 5th that season, and only narrowly trailing Liverpool, who nearly won the Premier League title, and having a squad which boasted the likes of Shay Given, Fabrizio Colaccini, Kevin Nolan, Joey Barton, Damien Duff, Nicky Butt and Michael Owen. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Money might determine almost everything in football, but there is always someone, somewhere, for a certain period of time, who is stupid enough to cause a disruption in the matrix. and for that, they deserve our immense gratitude. Thank you all, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video. Obviously, I hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, any suggestions that you think I might have missed in this 7. And it goes without saying at this stage, doesn't it? Make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, like Endrick does, not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might fancy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, or Threads via the username @HITC Sevens on all 3, should you wish to do so. And all of those links, plus a whole lot more good stuff, should be down in the video description below. Cheers.